in order to present you to our audience, I'm going to read your CVs, a small part of it, and in Portuguese, as Liliana just mentioned. I'm going to start with Hubert Schmitz. Hubert Schmitz é professor emérito do Instituto de
Não se vê, eu não estou enxergando você. Você coloca mais alto, você vê a metade da tua cara. Aí.
É que eu estou lendo aqui. O Hubert Schmitz é professor emérito do Instituto de Estudos de Desenvolvimento na Universidade de Sussex, na Inglaterra. Ele é um economista de desenvolvimento com um interesse particular em como e por que os obstáculos à transformação são superados. Ele é pesquisador sobre as coalizões de governo, empresários e atores civis, acelerando ou impedindo transformações, né, do desenvolvimento. Seus trabalhos recentes estão concentrados em quais são os motores das políticas de clima, relevantes para o clima, nas potências emergentes. O Ian Miles pesquisa sobre inovação, especialmente inovação no setor de serviço e no papel do SKIB, né? Knowledge Intensive Business Service, serviços intensivos em conhecimento. É professor da Universidade de Manchester e pesquisador na Higher School of Economics em Moscou. Mais recentemente, as publicações dele se focam na questão dos kits, né? E na questão da crise do coronavírus e estudos de prospecção. O professor Benjamin Coriat é professor emérito de Economia da Universidade de Paris 13. Seus domínios de pesquisa cobrem a economia industrial e da inovação, a economia das instituições e a economia das empresas. Depois de muitas pesquisas, várias pesquisas centradas ao longo dos últimos anos na questão da economia dos comuns, né, dos comuns e dos bens comuns. São áreas em que ele publicou duas obras, né? Le Retour des communs e vers une république de biens communs. É isso, uma leitura reduzida. So now I'll let you with Professora Liliana Acero. She's going to say a little bit more about our guest.
Obrigada.
Welcome to our seminar.
Obrigada, Francisco. Well, I'm going to speak English and sometimes portunhol, as you know. Algumas vezes vou falar um pouquinho de portunhol. Eu estou super emocionada de que estejam aqui os três, porque são grandes amigos meus de muito tempo e colegas de muitos anos. Eu digo que I'm saying that I'm very pleased to have you here because you are old friends. Not old in sense of old, but of a long time, and colleagues also. And your work is wonderful, and I followed it almost all of it closely. So I'm very pleased to have you here. So the order in which I'm a visiting professor, senior foreign professor in pped, and my work is on regenerative medicine in Brazil compared to the UK, or UK as a reference point. So it's not my topic, this one, but we are all interested in this topic now. So it's everybody's topic, wanted or not, in terms of the fact that we're living with it. So the order will be Ian will speak first, and I'll give him a bit more minutes as I've combined with Hubert because his PowerPoint is a bit longer. Then we have Hubert Schmitz, and to finalize, we have Benjamin Coriat, whom most of you know well because he's been working on Brazil the last years a lot, and we hope to have him back as soon as Corona finishes. Benjamin, welcome. So, Ian, before you speak, I just want to add on a few things. Well, first, that you also work on Russia, so you have a lot of experience in other countries besides England, also in many other countries. And Ian has a long trajectory on services and innovation, as Francisco said, but also on foresight and future studies, as I've said before. And he's worked a lot on human development in general, also in developing countries. He has shared a lot with people here. He comes regularly to Unicampi, to the Institute of Economics, and he knows a bit of Portuguese, so you can depend on that for your questions, although you will be sending the questions to me in the chat. And please, when you send the questions, see, vejam a quem dirigem as perguntas, porque podem ser gerais ou dirigidas a uma pessoa, então seria bom, porque eu vou resumir isso, seria bom vocês dizer a quem está dirigida no final. So, coming back to Ian, he also has all his work, or most of his work is published in his blogs. He has many blogs that you can access very easily and download his work. And he's got ResearchGate, as most people do. And he has quite a lot of knowledge on Brazil. The three of you, of the panelists, have lived or worked in Brazil. So you have a good relationship with the country and you like it, and which is a very important issue also. And so now I won't talk anymore, except Ian, if I forgot something, you can add on. If I forgot to say something about your CV, your long 100 and something publications and books. And I'm adding on with Ian because he tends to be very humble. So I just wanted to add on about his CV. So Ian, we are with you, and the slides will be passed by us, no? Your PowerPoint.
Yeah, or I could share them from my machine with you if you like.
It's better for you. Say which is better.
I don't have to keep saying, next slide, next slide.
Okay, then you do it. Okay.
So let's
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. So let us see. Yeah, okay, let's see if this works. Tell me if this doesn't work.
Just a second. Okay.
How's that?
Okay, it worked.
Good. Okay. Well, first of all, apologies for needing to speak English. My language capacity is average English person's language capacity. Very, very low. But also apologies. This pandemic is a terrible business. Many people are really badly hit, and not just the people that have suffered the disease, but also their families, their friends, people in the health services, people in social care. We will have many, many people suffering post-traumatic stress disorder in the years to come. And probably quite a few of us will also have survivor guilt in the years to come. And that is something that I'm not going to touch on, because I'm just far too close to this to talk about this. And then the third thing to say is the UK is really 4 different countries. There are lots of differences of detail between England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. But I'm going to talk as if that's not the case today. So my apologies. And I'm trying to get my slide to change. Come on. So much for my, here we go. Yeah, so let's start by just introducing where Britain is at right now in terms of a couple of very simple parameters. We are outstanding in Europe in terms of the number of people that have died of coronavirus. These statistics, of course, are very arguable, contested statistics, but I was looking today on fresh data websites, and Britain is just above Spain, and that Spain is above Italy and so on in terms of numbers of deaths. We also actually do very badly in terms of deaths per capita. We do very badly if you look at total excess deaths. So the number more people dying than usually die in these months of the year. not a great performance. And the UK economy is badly hit, and the projections are that it's also going to be particularly badly hit among European economies. So you can't say we have saved lives by hitting the economy, we have saved the economy by hitting lives. We have managed to be outstanding in both of these things. So I'm going to address this quickly and unscientifically in terms of a series of ideas. Starting with the letter A. Arrogance, amplification, acceleration, anticipation. So to talk about arrogance, we need to look at how we got here, just the very recent past. We've had conservative or conservative...
Ele diz, mantém a vigência do outro. E lá no outro dizia que era 8 anos.
Yeah. Okay, can I go on?
Yeah, sorry, Ian.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Please,
Go on, Ian.
everybody
Go.
take off the microphone, please.
Yeah. So we've had 10 years of government running down public services, running down health, education, police, all sorts of emergency services, criticizing public servants and the civil service, fostering the idea of a neoliberal small state. We've had continuing increases in social inequality, polarization between the top echelons and the lower echelons of society in terms of income and wealth. We had a horrible period of political distrust and debate around Brexit, where a lot of hostility was being whipped up against ethnic minorities, against immigrants to the UK. We had a very divisive election, and as a result of the Brexit saga and the fact that the country was very stuck about that, we had a Conservative government elected at the end of the year with a very large majority. And that is the government that has inherited this pandemic to deal with. We inherited a lot of scientific work demonstrating the importance of being prepared for a pandemic like this. There were numerous studies, at least 6 studies in the last 10 years, with modeling, with rehearsals, with simulation games, to examine the issues of dealing with a pandemic in Britain. Because a pandemic became regarded as the top risk that the country faced, the most likely serious bad thing that was going to happen to us. And the assessment was, oh, Britain is very well prepared. We're the second best prepared country in the world. The first is the United States. There are a few problems. Actually, there are some rather serious problems which we need to address. We need better equipment for intensive care in hospitals. We need better protective clothing for people. We need to sort out problems in social care. But we are a pretty good situation.
Ian, sorry, you forgot to pass on the slides.
No, this is still the same slide, but I'm about to move.
Sorry.
Yeah. And so I will give a very quick summary of what has happened this year. We began the year basically with the government's position being we weren't going to be affected by this. This was the position in January. Then the position moved towards thinking, well, there is a small risk. There is quite a large risk that we will be affected, but still we can contain this disease. We don't have to do very much. We're weeks behind other countries like Spain and Italy. We have lots of time to gather our forces to contain the disease. And this was more or less the situation until the middle of March. And our Prime Minister was very relaxed. He didn't bother to attend the meetings of the major emergency committee for 2 months. That's COBRA. he only started attending after we started getting deaths in this country. But still, we thought we could manage this until suddenly in the middle of March, it was realized that what was happening was not what was expected. We were not 1 month behind Italy. We were more like 10 to 13 days behind Italy. The rate of infection was moving much faster than people had expected because they were ignoring the Chinese data and assuming it was like flu. People's experience in hospitals was very different from the experience with flu. Many more people needed to go into intensive care to stay on ventilators a long time. A lot of young people were being affected. Sure, the disease was killing mostly old people, but many young people were also getting affected badly. And so there was a major change in policy. And suddenly, not as suddenly as many of us wanted, but suddenly the country moved towards recommending that people stay at home, recommending they try to work from home, insisting they stay at home and work from home unless their jobs are absolutely critical jobs, closing bars, restaurants, shops other than food shops and pharmacists and so on, moving into a period of strong lockdown. And that just about stopped the major catastrophe that looked to be happening as hospitals were facing more and more problems of people in crisis. And now we're moving into a period where the government is of the view that we can loosen many of these restrictions. So this is the statistics of people's deaths. And you see that the hospital deaths mysteriously really never quite made 1,000 a day. But actually there were a lot more people dying than 1,000 a day because old people were being moved out of hospitals and put into social care homes. And they were not being tested as to whether they had coronavirus or not. So of course, a lot of them took coronavirus into social care homes, and we developed a crisis in that part of the economy and society as well. So this was something of a scandal, and it's a scandal that is not really admitted as being a part of a deliberate policy. But there are many things which are not admitted and not apologized for in the situation in the UK. What we find was the hospitals were on the whole not overwhelmed. They came very close to running out of beds, running out of oxygen, things like this. But with a couple of local exceptions, they just about coped at a very high cost to staff who were working really long hours in really tragic conditions in many cases. And of course, many staff themselves got ill and some staff died as well. We failed to have a proper testing and tracing strategy. Another aspect of arrogance is that we said we didn't need to do what other people were doing. We would develop our own system. It was going to be a world-beating system. This has now been abandoned in the last week because they couldn't do it. And that sort of UK exceptionalism, we have the best science, we don't need to pay attention to what China is saying, we don't need to pay attention to what Italy is telling us, we don't need to use their method, we don't need to be part of European systems for procuring equipment or procuring clothing. This was a common feature, and in many ways still is a common feature of the system. And central government also tends to try to control everything itself centrally and ignores the role that is importantly played by city level and regional health authorities. Okay, but now we're in a situation where we managed to get past this wave of the disease. We are beginning to relax our social restrictions. Other shops are opening other than just food shops and pharmacists. People are being encouraged to go back to work, although they're also encouraged not to use public transport because that's not particularly safe if it's crowded. And there's a lot of argument about whether it's really safe to ease these restrictions when the disease is declining at a much slower rate than it increased. And here we are this week. We were told, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, explained to everybody that we could stop our hibernation and we could go out and enjoy ourselves now. Only in groups of up to 6 people. And we weren't to stay overnight in other people's houses. But we could go and enjoy ourselves. So people have been going and enjoying themselves. So we wait to see whether our infection rate increases again, as it has done in several European countries since they ended lockdown. So that was arrogance, but I wanted to talk about some other features of the experience, and I'll do this faster. So first, amplification. One of the things that was very obvious is that the corona crisis has hit some groups in society particularly badly. It was very apparent when we saw on one day in the newspapers a set of photographs of the doctors who had died of coronavirus. And they were all brown faces. The first 8 doctors to die were all immigrants to Britain. And more generally, it was shown that the death rates among almost all minority groups are higher for immigrant groups than among the traditional white British population. I think Chinese might be an exception, in fact, but almost all immigrant groups, especially Bangladeshi, it doesn't show up on this particular, especially Bangladeshi and Black African Caribbean people are badly hit. And this, of course, is very redolent because at this moment we have the Black Lives Matter campaign and I Can't Breathe as the slogan. And that has attracted a great deal of support in this country because the contrast between the anti-immigrant feeling of Brexit and the vital role that many immigrants have played in our society and their high negative impact of the corona crisis on them is very apparent. And amplification applies in other ways as well. So if you just use a traditional social class measure by occupation, you see, well, the more badly paid occupations, the people that have to keep at work because they're keeping us going, they're supplying food, they're doing basic services like portering, carrying things around, delivering things, cleaning, activities like that are the people that are at greater risk of mortality. These are figures corrected for age differences and things of this sort.
Ian, you have about 3-4 more minutes or a bit more.
Yeah,
are you okay with that?
Yeah, I move fast now. So acceleration, the second thing. Several trends that were underway were accelerated in the corona crisis. One is e-commerce. Steadily growing, but a major increase in the amount of shopping that people were doing online. E-work, many people moved to working at home, especially people in the more professional qualifications where it's much more easy to do your work at home. But we see a great increase in all measures of use of the internet, use of online services of one sort or another to assist working. This is video conferencing like we're doing right now. Deceleration of mobility with much less use of motor cars and public transport during the crisis, much less travel in general. And one of the things that this means for our societies is that some long-standing trends, the erosion of the high street, the crisis that's been affecting many city centres is intensified because already e-commerce was hitting the high street. Many shops were disappearing. Many other high street services were being replaced by online services. But now, added to this, many businesses are talking about not having such major facilities in the centre of cities. they can do much more of their work online. They've learned that they can do what disabled people were telling them for decades they could do, and a lot more electronic working. So trends of acceleration, trends of amplification. And in the context of this, we can sort of think about anticipation. What glimpses of the future, of possible futures, can we see? And this is a diagram produced by my friend Joe Ravets, just to illustrate that there are alternative futures emerging out of this terrible situation that we've been going through. And one way in which we could think about this is a classic 2x2 scenario framework. Lots of you will be familiar with this. We could have scenarios in the vertical axis where the economy stays at a very low Great Depression sort of level, as opposed to economy being recovered to some extent, maybe not recovered in the same way as in the past, but still an economy capable of generating well-being, welfare, work for people. And on the horizontal axis, we could have different sorts of futures based on, say, on the left, more populism, more social divides, more nationalism, individualism, and towards the right, maybe scenarios where there's much more of a sort of social, ecological, maybe even communitarian sort of identification. This is a notional sort of scenario framework that I just make up by sitting down, but it seems to me it's a pretty good guess of the sort of thing we would see were we to run scenario workshops on the post-pandemic future. When I say post-pandemic, I mean we are likely to be living with coronavirus for years to come in one form or another, post this peak of the pandemic. And I wanted to end by saying that there are lots and lots of negative drivers that might be pushing us in the left-hand direction, but there are also factors that could play a role in pushing us more towards the right. And I think a couple of the positive things that we can see in the corona crisis can be identified. And one is seeing much more of the value of the public sector, the value of public services. Every day people go out and applaud, every week people go out and applaud the National Health Service, for example. There's an awareness that many people performing relatively menial services are actually performing absolutely vital jobs for our social welfare. And there's an awareness that the state can act. For years, we've been told, oh, this sustainable development is impossible because governments will never be able to take the moves necessary to change our economies. Well, it turned out governments can take these moves, or at least some governments can. Even conservative governments in the UK can, to some extent, when the pressure is on. And in addition to these developments, there are aspects of quality of life that people can see to be improved in the corona crisis. Unevenly, of course, much more if you're wealthy than if you're poor. But there is now good survey data suggesting that people are aware of many things that they weren't before. So the value of bottom-up collective efforts, for example, which have been very important in dealing with many of the problems of the crisis, people getting their shopping done for them by neighbors, people getting masks made for them by neighbors, things of this sort. People have been appreciating improvements in environmental conditions from very local conditions like much more improved air quality. Oh, our children aren't getting asthma as badly as they were doing. Through to improvements in the natural environment, lower levels of pollution, and a revival of many of the landscapes that we enjoy living in when we can get to see them. So there are positive developments that might well be mobilized to move us more in the towards the right-hand scenarios than the left-hand scenarios. These will be experienced in different ways in different places. I just hope the UK is not going to be exceptionally bad in respect of these developments. It hasn't shown much promise in the last few years, but maybe the coronavirus can be a turning point for us here too. So, muito obrigado. Thanks very much.
Many thanks, Ian. Many thanks for your wonderful substantive presentation as always. And now we're going to go towards Hubert. Hubert Schmitz, then, beyond what Francisco said, além do que Francisco falou de Hubert Schmitz, amigo de muitos anos, in the last years, beyond value chains and industrial clusters that you know, most of the Brazilians know well, and they've been translated his papers. He also worked a lot on issues like climate change in relation to the alliances that government, civic society, and businesses especially have done around climate change. And he's a development economist, so he's always putting as an emphasis the opportunities that transformations, even sometimes not so easy transformations like in Vietnam, Cambodia, etc., have been able to have a good result for development. He's done some of the work in that direction with John Humphrey, but he's also published, I forgot to say, Ian published with John Ferraz a long time ago, and Hubert has published with John Humphrey many of his, who also people know here in Brazil, many of those last pieces of work, or some of them, in IDS. And he also works closely with some Brazilians, Ian, like Casiolato he's worked with, and from the Institute, no, and Rui, I can't remember his name, from Brasilia. You can mention him afterwards. Rui Barbosa is his name, I don't remember. And you can find his work in to download in the presentation that Hubert is going to make in the first page, the first slide, or I can send it by the chat. So thank you, Hubert, for making a very big effort to get into a topic that is not yours. And I thank you very much for that. I think my insistence and friendship made you do it, and also your goodwill. Okay, we're looking forward to hearing you. Hubert is German, but he's been living in England forever since his student days and working at IDS. He's emeritus like Ian and emeritus professor like Ian and Benjamin. So we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, Hubert. Hi.
Hello. Thank you, Liliana, for inviting me to think a bit more systematically about the experiences here in Europe. Can you all see this slide?
Yes, yes, it's great.
Good. So, Liliana has invited me to talk about the German case, and I'm happy to do this and make some comparative remarks on the British case, which Ian has just presented in such an informative way. Let me start with some basic information. Germany has a population of 83 million people. The number of corona deaths this morning was 9,029, and the deaths per million are 108. Compare this with the UK, population of 67 million, corona deaths this morning of 43,550, and deaths per million of 650. So the likelihood of dying from corona is 6 times higher in the UK compared with Germany. So my German family in Germany is asking, what on earth am I doing here and staying here in this country? Anyway, I will stay here, but it is nevertheless a sobering experience. The main thing I want to do in this short presentation, explain why Germany has done a good deal better than the UK, and I will try to focus on just a few key factors. The first thing to mention is leadership from the top. Angela Merkel has really played a key role in the country's response to the corona crisis. She's done this in 3 ways. First of all, she has been very effective in engaging with experts. She has taken the epidemic seriously from the start, unlike Trump or Boris Johnson or Bolsonaro. And she's taken a lot of time to understand what these epidemiologists are saying. And of course, different epidemiologists tell you different things, and she worked out for herself what she thinks is the most credible or most likely scenario. So effective engagement with experts is something she was perhaps not surprisingly bad at, because she herself has a doctorate in physics. The second thing that stands out is her capacity to convene and coordinate key actors. As most of you will know, Germany is a very decentralized country. It consists of 16 states which have their own governments, and most of the policy instruments that influence the corona response in the sphere of health or economic change, economic policy, these instruments lie in the hands of the lender or state governments. They are not something that the federal government has control over. So early on in the crisis, she convened the various prime ministers of these 16 states, some of whom had different ideas of how to proceed. And she is widely acknowledged to have managed to bring about a consensus, which is of course essential for formulating clear messages to the people. Which takes me to my third point, and that is her credibility in communicating problems and solutions to the public. She's been very humble, but also very clear in communicating to the public, explaining in her own words, but clear words, what the problems were, but also emphasizing the limitations of what we can expect from science, and emphasizing the limitations of what policymakers can do, and emphasizing how much any measure relies on the participation of everyone. And this honesty really helped a great deal. It's in great contrast, as Ian has indicated, to the arrogance with which our British government has presented the case, always, not always, but often making wild promises of a world-beating progress and projecting targets which were plainly unachievable. So leadership from the top was one important factor which helps to explain why Germany did reasonably well in responding to this crisis. I'm coming to a second set of factors which are all to do with testing, tracing, and isolating. I think we will all heard the main messages that came from the World Health Organization early on in the crisis, namely speed matters, first message. Secondly, test, test, test. And this is precisely what Germany has done. The government, particularly at local level, immediately mobilized all testing capacities in the country, in local health centers, in public laboratories, in private laboratories. And so the timing was essential, doing this very quickly. So they relied on what existed already and mobilized that very quickly. Secondly, they expanded the existing capacity to test and trace continuously. In fact, it continues to happen now. And thirdly, they have emphasized a lot the need to target the testing and tracing, well, particularly the tracing. as all of you will know, a small number of people, in fact, large numbers of people. The epidemic does not spread evenly. And this fact of a small number of people infecting large numbers really calls for a very targeted intervention, targeted tracing, pouncing very quickly where the problems arise. And this is really what Germany has in common with other countries such as Korea, via Vietnam and Japan, who have been even more successful in limiting the number of deaths compared with Germany. Targeting and pouncing very quickly on where the problems arise. This is, so test, trace, and isolate is the second set of factors that helps to explain. And what you can conclude perhaps from what I just said is that really the merit in responding effectively and quickly lies with the current government. But I think this would be a vast oversimplification, because the current government apparatus could rely on a well-developed pre-existing structure and pre-existing generous funding of public health and the health sector more generally. To give you an idea, Germany has, as I indicated earlier on, a very decentralized political and administrative system that means the states and even the municipalities are responsible and are seen as responsible for dealing with the outbreak of the epidemic, but also have the administrative...
Hubert, sorry, Hubert, we don't have your slide. You have a slide on this.
Yes, pre-existing structure and funding.
No, but we don't have it here. It's not being passed, shown.
Okay, I'll go
Liliana,
back. Do you have
it's
it
okay
now?
for me. It's okay for me. I can see it
Yeah, okay, I can see it too.
perfectly. Yeah,
I can
Sorry,
see it
then it's my
too.
problem. Sorry.
probably.
Shall I carry on?
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so perhaps a good number is that Germany has 400 local public health offices, 400 local public health offices employing over 20,000 people who are all government employees. And these 400 public health offices were there before. These 20,000 people were there before the outbreak of the pandemic. And even though there were for years complaining about funding, in effect, having looked into this, the funding for public health services in general and for fighting diseases in particular has been relatively stable. And this is, of course, in big contrast to something that Ian Miles emphasized earlier on, which was the savage cuts, the savage reductions in funding for public health services. And public health services, of course, deals in this case mainly with testing and tracing, and those people who are diagnosed with COVID and need to be hospitalized then need to rely not just on public services but on a well-developed hospital system. And here it's good to mention that Germany has, compared with the UK, 2 or 3 times as many intensive care units that existed before the outbreak of the corona crisis. So what I want to say is that the capability of responding to such a crisis does not just depend on the capacity of your government, of the current government, but depends a lot on what went on in the years beforehand. I'm really echoing here a message that Ian Miles also made earlier on. I will then summarize, and just a moment, let me stop these slides. My summary would be that the political leaders reacted fast and took the epidemic seriously. They were very good at mobilizing and coordinating all actors at national, state, and local levels. And the good results that they achieved can be credited to the pre-existence of a decentralized and well-funded structure concerned with public health. I think the key message is that there is no superhero there in this story. And basically, the German government just did what governments are supposed to do, namely taking good care of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Hubert, very much. You're an expert now on Corona. I'm glad.
Of course, yes.
A new skill. That was excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, now I want to introduce Benjamin Coriat. Hello, Benjamin.
Hello.
Benjamin, or most of you know, personally, I mean, besides his wonderful work, I started at the same time, more or less, than Benjamin with the labor process, and that's how we met. So here, the translations of your Taylorism and post-Fordism are very strong, but you have other work that's also been translated, que también fue traducido, que son sobre the commons y IP, propriedade intelectual. Ele tem muito sobre isso, tem trabalhado com várias pessoas aqui com um projeto conjunto no Instituto, com Lia Hassenclever, Paulo Chigre, outras pessoas, e Ana Célia, claro, pero não sei se em um projeto de pesquisa ou mais nos seminários, não sei muito bem, isso a Ana pode dizer. E também, nas últimas coisas que eu li, está também toda esta discussão do futuro, of the future after Corona, during Corona, and the transformations that will take place. E ele também tem outros trabalhos que eu não conhecia de você, Benjamin, que são explorações do território, das populações, isso eu não conhecia, e a parte nutricional que você fez, que eu também não conhecia. Conhecia mais sobre o BCR, toda a ligação com câncer e tudo isso. Então, não vou falar mais, e contente você estar aqui. I'm very happy that you're here, and then it's your time now. And you can have about even 20 minutes because your presentation is longer. I have a problem now, Francisco, with the slides. Let's see if I can get hold of them.
Yeah.
Welcome, Benjamin, começa. Aí está. Agora eu contenho os seus slides.
Ok.
Ok. Bom, primeiro, obrigado pelo convite. Estou muito feliz de retomar a discussão com os amigos brasileiros. Now I pass to English. Thanks very much for this invitation. I have divided, please, next slide. I have divided my presentation in two blocks, let's say. One has to do with facts about the French case, and the other one is, the other part is more on some debate we have after, I hope, after the coronavirus crisis, at least at this moment. Please, next slide. Okay, next. I begin with data and facts and a brief presentation of the pandemic in France. Next slide. Let me say the key message. The key message is that we discovered that the public health system in France was completely unprepared to face such a pandemic. And this was a very big surprise because we thought that we had a strong public health system, and the crisis was the discover that this was not absolutely the case. And more than that, the strategy followed has not to do with the one exposed by Hubert, a rational one based on experts' analysis and so on. The strategy followed was just invented to take into account that we had not the appropriate tools to face the pandemics. Please, next slide. We had a lack of everything. The emblematic question is the one of the masks. In 2009, we had a very important stock of masks to face pandemics, but the liberal wing that took place destroyed slowly all the stocks with the idea that in case of emergency, the market can provide the necessary equipment. And of course, it was not the case, because in a global pandemic, every country fight to have its own part of the equipment. And finally, many countries could not, we are not able to gather the necessary equipment. This is what is the case of France. Please, next. Next slide. So the strategy to face the disease was just dictated by the fact that we had not sufficiently beds, we had in hospitals, we had not respirators and oxygen, and we were obliged to introduce a very strong and very strict isolation just to prevent the hospitals to be in situation of overwhelming. Please, next. You can see in yellow this is a presentation of the rigor of isolation and confinement measures adopted in different countries. You can see that France was during a long time the highest with Italy. And this because this was the only way to protect and to save lives, because the hospitals were not prepared for that. Next slide, please. You can see the number of patients of hospitals, and you see, you could verify, we have no time for that, that it was exactly when the curve began to raise that confinement and isolation was introduced, just to let the hospitals have a possibility to treat the people in need. Next slide. You see the patients in hospitals, and the confinement began with the acceleration of the curve. Next slide, please. Why so? Because once upon a time, just in 2000, the French public health system was ranked by OECD as one of the best in the world, and #1 in many criteria. But soon after began a series of neoliberal reforms that have put the French hospitals in a very, very poor situation. Budget, personal, the way the hospital was financed were completely moved, and finally the hospital was in a very poor situation to confront the crisis. Next slide, please. Let me come to the questions that were raised during the pandemics and that are now very hot in the discussion among scientists, among politicians, and with the civil society. Next slide, please. First, we are rethinking the very concept of public service to try to make public health a common good. What is the difference between the two? And the difference between the two is that we understood that public service will never, cannot mean public property. On the contrary, public service should be associated with forms of governance, with initiative of the personnel in charge that are protected from the public interventions. Of course, public service means that the public intervention, the public budget is important, but public service should be something different than a private property of the public authority. Next slide, please. Making public health a common good means three things, and this is exactly what we are discussing now and what we are trying to introduce. First, access to care has to be guaranteed to all without discrimination. Second, privatization of the services delivered as commons should be prohibited. And this is the difference between a commons and a public service. A public service or a public good could be privatized. A common, never. This is in the constitution of a commons not to be never privatized. And third point is a mode of governance that should be assumed by an ensemble of stakeholders, health personnel, actors, managers, and so on. This requires to build a series of not-for-profit specific entities. Hubert was absolutely right. Without the infrastructure, you cannot face a pandemic. And without a control on public decisions through the appropriate governance, you cannot build the right infrastructure, especially in a period of neoliberal policies. Next. The second discussion is about the question of Anthropocene or Capitalocene and zoonosis. One very important point is that long ago it was admitted that the entry in the Anthropocene age had impacts on health issues. See, for example, the Lancet countdowns on hate and on health and climate change. Every year since last year, they publish a report showing the impacts of Anthropocene on climate change. On Anthropocene and climate change on health issues. What is new is that during this pandemic, we observed that a series of facts are very important. These facts are the following. They lie on the idea that new diseases linked to specific things of Anthropocene, that is to say, deforestation, extractivism, put animals in contact with humans in conditions that would never happen in normal times. And this contact creates a situation of new pandemics, SARS-1 and 2, the actual COVID, HIV/AIDS, MERS, Ebola, many others, known as zoonosis, that is to say, diseases transmitted from virus living in animals to human beings, are now spreading. And this is what we are living now. And the question posed is that Anthropocene is certainly not only a question of climate change, but also a question of new pandemics and repetitive ones to come in the future. Next slide, please. If these observations revealed verified, and there are many reasons to have them verified. A lot of scientific literature is already given and available on this question. Then the question of extractivism and spread of zoonosis is a key one for the present and the future. And more than ever, the question of building public health as a commons in the age of the Anthropocene becomes on the top of the agenda. Next. Next slide, please. The last word is exactly to say that we need to rethink public health as a commons, and beside the COVID pandemic as such, very important learning could result for the present. And maybe the main lesson is that if we want to prevent the coming of, not to prevent the coming of the new pandemics, the question of dealing with climate change is key. And more generally, the lesson is that Anthropocene risk of spread of zoonosis, but at the same time, Anthropocene opens a new era, the era of the building of public goods and of the building of commons. If such happens, then the learning will reveal very useful for all of us. That is my last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin, for a substantive presentation, as usual, and also for bringing questions that we can take up. Ao público, quiero dizer que esses slides van a estar disponíveis para as pessoas, se os panelistas dão o permisso, porque alguns foram passados um pouco rápido. Agora eu estou abrindo para as perguntas. Now I'm opening for the questions, and there are one that is, or two that are directed to Ian, and one that seems to be for the three of you. So the ones directed to Ian, Ian responded on the chat, but I think it would be good to present them, if you agree.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of them, I'm looking for it, okay? Aguarda un poquillo.
Well, I can remember two big questions.
Okay, but I want to yes, go ahead. Then I translate a summary if it's needed.
Well, one was about the how to progress in a world of conservative governments.
Yeah, that one, yes.
Yeah. And yes, of course, this is very difficult. And I mean, I think the UK is not in a good place here. There are some developments that conservative governments may be persuaded to adopt. And there is, for example, there is a lot of logic in the notion of green growth that can appeal to conservatives. Many jobs are created, and we are going to be facing a situation of high unemployment in the years to come. Many jobs can be created in energy efficiency, in sustainable energy, and new modes of agriculture, all sorts of things like that. So there are things where there can be some traction, but there are many things where there is heavy opposition, of course, and then we just have to find alternative sources of power. So often local governments, community organizations, voluntary organizations and pressure groups can engage in some sort of action. sometimes that is not more than just campaigning, it's actually demonstrating alternative ways of organizing, alternative ways of doing things. One of the big challenges is to find ways where this no longer is activity which is mainly involving and benefiting middle-class people, but can appeal to a lot of the parts of the population which in many Western societies are highly alienated, disenfranchised parts of the population.
Okay.
But there are possibilities.
Thank you, Ian. Do you want to add anything to that, Hubert, because it involves England also, or no? No? Okay. The other question for you, Ian, that you have answered, it was from Renata Larrovere. You can answer here because it's useful for everybody. How, in your opinion, the services sector, especially firms in the sharing economy, will respond to this crisis?
Right. Yes, and of course not just firms in the sharing economy, but individuals in the sharing economy, because the way in which a lot of these sharing developments work is via platforms where there are firms that suddenly become very big firms often that run the platform, but then there are large numbers of people that are working as freelancers and often working on relatively low salaries, but not appearing as employees of these firms. And of course, so that applies in particular to services like delivery services, taxi services, various sorts of personal services. Perhaps in the future, the tendency would be towards also things like social care services. You know, you can use a platform to find somebody to look after your grandmother when somebody needs to give her care and attention, for example. And then there are other platforms that are based much more on sharing of facilities, especially people's residences and accommodations and things like that. So the Airbnb sort of intervention, but also sharing of other sorts of things. Some of them intellectual things, so crowdsourcing ideas. Some of them other tangible goods like tools and things like that, which people share. Right, so a lot of different things. Many of these activities have been very badly hit by the corona crisis because people are not traveling to stay in Airbnb guest houses or flats. People are not using Uber type taxi services. Activities of this sort are really badly hit. The people that were dependent upon these for their livelihood, in other words, these self-employed people, so-called, that work for the platform, can have a very, very bad time of it.
Ian, do you want me to read you read what you said about the OECD in answering to Renata? Yeah. You can say that or no?
Yeah, because the OECD has recently been doing a series of reports on what they call the platform economy and on platform work, and what sorts of policy initiative might be necessary to basically provide more support and security for platform workers. I'd also point you to the European Foundation in Dublin, Eurofound, which has been working on this topic. But I mean, I think ultimately this takes us in other directions, and I think it takes us in the direction of thinking about new methods of livelihood, about universal basic incomes, so moving away from traditional forms of welfare benefit and unemployment benefit to essentially the idea that everyone has a right to a livelihood, and that if you then want to go on and earn extra money to do extra things, then all well and good. But actually being maintained with your basic needs met should be a human right. So universal.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Sorry. Say again, I interrupted you, sorry.
I say universal basic income, or there's even a more radical idea, universal basic services, but one way or the other.
Okay, then there's a Ana Celia praising the idea that the commons, the statement that commons cannot be privatized ever, so that one is directed to Benjamin. Perhaps, Benjamin, you can enlarge on that, or no?
Yeah, I can say a few things.
Just a moment. And also read Celia Keternetsky.
I haven't got there yet, because it was how to prevent the public sector as captured by the unions. But that way it's not only for Benjamin, it's for everybody. So that's why I gave the talk for Benjamin to expand a bit that, and then the other one I think can be more general.
Yeah. No, the fact is, these things are new things, things that we are discovering. During a long time, we thought that public services had to be in the hand of public authorities, of the state, so to speak. And this has been very much the European tradition. What we discover with the neoliberal wing is that putting public services in the hand of the state can open to a series of privatization, a series of policies that prevent the public from benefiting what the public services are supposed to deliver. So if we want to come back to the very notion of the public service, that is to say, service to the public, not property of the state, which is a completely different thing. So if we want to come back to this very notion that the public service is a service to the public, then we need a type of governance very specific. And one point of that governance is that a public service has to be governed by a series of stakeholders, among them citizens, and they had to be prevented from being privatized. Stefano Rodota, who is one of the big theoreticians, he's a lawyer in Italy, has a project of law for common goods, where the question of the prohibition to privatize a commons or a public service or service dedicated to the whole public is key. And this is the kind of things we are debating. It's not easy, nothing is easy in that. But if we follow the idea that public service is service for the public and not property of the state, then we open a series of new possibilities.
Okay, thank you, Benjamin. Now there's one that is for the three of you. How to prevent that public service is captured by unions. Jorge Camargo asked that. And maybe if you want, Hubert, you can start. How to prevent that public service is captured by unions, if you want.
I can't.
Okay, somebody else then.
No, but I can say just one word. It's a question of governance. And the question of governance, as I have said, has to be organized around a series of stakeholders that organize a balance of powers. This is a way to prevent either the public authorities or the unions or anyone else to take power. So the question of the balance between the powers of the stakeholders is a key question relating to how to govern commons, that is to say, services to the public.
Okay, thank you. Ian, do you want to add anything on?
No, I mean, that point that Benjamin made seems to me to be exactly right. How you achieve that balance is a very good question. How you, yes, you can pass laws about that, but then governments are in charge of what laws get passed. So there's always dangers that governments will intervene and say, no, this has to be structured in another way. Thus, you have to have, in some form, strong popular support built for it.
No, even the question is...
wait, Benjamin, because Leonello asked something else, adding on to that question, which is, what about the power of NGOs, civil society strengths, etc.? It's about the same question.
Yeah, it's about the same question. They have to be part, and an important part of the new governance system. And to answer, to continue the discussion with Jan, to prevent the state from taking power, this can be organized through constitutional laws. We are dealing with very serious thing. If it is in the constitution that the public authority cannot take the power, privatize and so on, they just can't, because they have to change the constitution. So lawyers have already thought about that.
Okay. Now, there's another question. Have you finished or want to say something more than this, any of you? No. Okay, there's one by Marion Camus saying, that one is for Ian. What can we as citizens do to move towards a green growth scenario in a context where politics will be under huge pressure to support quick economic recovery? You follow Ian?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say one obvious thing to do is to work with organizations that are pushing for sustainable development, for green growth, for green recovery, and all sorts of things like that. There are many such organizations. They often suffer from being fragmented and pursuing lots of individual campaigns rather than working with a single common cause. But I think this is almost certainly a very good opportunity for many of them to be mobilized around green growth or green job creation or some other sort of, not everyone would like the term growth, that's the problem. I'm happy with it, but not everyone is. But green recovery, something like that can link together, a very wide spectrum of environmental movements.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Hubert wants to add something on. He's happy with this question.
This question of green recovery, moving towards a green transformation, requires introducing the concept of co-benefits into the discussion. You cannot persuade the population, you cannot persuade all business, you cannot persuade all government, you cannot persuade all civil society by just going on talking about your green objectives, namely better climate, better environment. What you need to emphasize is the co-benefits that come with the movement to green, namely more jobs, important for the workers and for the trade unions, new sources of taxation, important for lobbying all the people in government, better health in some cases, or better parenting even. If you think of all the new initiatives of moving the place of work from the office to the home, that needs to be funded. And this has fantastic implications for the health of the people. So what I'm talking about is not, let's just talk about green growth. Let's talk about a movement towards a human-centered recovery, a human-centered transformation in which better climate, better environment, better health, a stronger base for taxation, more and better jobs. It's that package that perhaps helps you to make some headway in the discussion, and it also helps you to forge alliances between. You can never have an alliance of everybody, but the moment you put it like this in terms of the co-benefits of a green move, then I think the chances of moving in a green direction are multiplied. And in that sense, I'm reasonably optimistic that even in the UK, we will make some progress.
Thank you, Hubert. Actually, I forgot to say that you were an expert on the greens in the last green development in the last years of your work. Then there is another one by Celia, which I think Benjamin already addressed, but I'm going to say it again. Public services cannot be privatized because they are our commons. Is that what you are suggesting, Benjamin? That because they are our commons, they can never be privatized? I think you answered that, no?
Yeah. This is exactly what I had in mind, and what is debated among politicians, civil society, and lawyers. I'm not saying that it is easy, but I'm saying that it is not impossible. Human rights has been a very long battle. Rights to the commons is just beginning. And there are many things to do. Just one point about the green development and so on. To give you good news, it happens. Yesterday in France, we had the elections for municipalities, mayors, and so on. It's an incredible wave of green and left parties that won the election. For the first time in history, Paris, Lyon, Bordeaux have passed toward this new coalition. It's not a simple, complex one, but something is happening. And
Benjamin Leonello asks, in relation to that, are they treated as our commons?
No, what I'm saying is that coronavirus is creating new subjectivities, new ways of thinking, you know. One of the results, at least in France, after all the bad news I gave on how the pandemic was combated in France so badly, one of the results is this wave of green and left parties taking the power in all the big cities in France. It's historical. It never happened.
Okay, thank you, Benjamin.
Liliana, Hubert wants to speak. He raised the hand. You were paying attention in another thing, but he raised the hand.
No, I saw him. I was going to pass on the word to him.
Okay.
Hubert.
And Diogo Antunes asked the question directed to Hubert. I can't see here because I mean.
But wait, don't mix me up. Let's go one by one.
Okay.
Have patience. Hubert, it's your turn to ask.
My turn?
Yes.
Thank you. I would like to make an additional comment to our very helpful discussion on public services initiated by Benjamin. And Benjamin, I think we all agree with the difficulty of farming the public services out to the private sector. There is, if you wish, a technical reason for making this virtually impossible. And this reason has been highlighted by the pandemic. The need for public services is not steady. It's not steady. So you cannot apply old-fashioned indicators of efficiency here. There are times when these health services are in enormous demand, and then there is little demand. So you need spare capacity. It's the same thing in the hospital sector. In the UK, the occupancy rate in hospitals, the occupancy of beds is 95% in normal times. In normal times. So in other words, there was no spare capacity to cope with these extra people. In the German case, you have an occupancy rate of 60 or 65%. So there was spare capacity to absorb more people in exceptional crisis time. This is very rarely considered. And it had huge implications in the UK, because the only reason why the UK hospitals were able to cope with all the numbers that needed to be hospitalized, as Ian Miles said early on, the only way this was possible was by canceling virtually all other operations. It is now estimated that the number of people who died from not having their operations, urgent operations on cancer and other important things, might have been higher than the corona deaths. And this is what happens if you have no spare capacity. And so this is something which I had never thought about this, but the corona crisis, which came suddenly, and it will, these things always come in waves, forces us to think about contingency and reserve. We need a strategic reserve capacity in the public sector. And you cannot have this strategic, the private sector would not be interested. Huh? It would be very difficult to justify for government giving a contract to a private operator just to be ready in case. In the private sector, it is more easy to justify. It's a seemingly technical but highly important thing that can, make the difference between life and death.
Do you want to add on anything, Ian, to this discussion? Because now we're turning to a different issue. Because somebody asked you, Deborah Fogel asked you of the chances for stupid governments to choose the right-hand scenario, but you actually answered, I think, that, Ian, already. But you want to come into this discussion?
Well, merely to say that I think the points that are made are all extremely good points. The terminology that's been very widely used is resilience, and about building resilient organizations and having resilient strategies in place. But we have seen that there has been a real failure of investment in this in the past, and that has to be corrected. The point that Benjamin made about the likelihood of future pandemics, at least until we have seriously restructured our modes of economic activity, makes me think that the need for continuing inefficient investment in preparing for these sorts of things is something that will be accepted in the future. Just as we have fire stations with fire engines waiting in them, and we're hoping we're not going to have fires, but of course we do from time to time.
Okay, thank you. Now we go on into a bit different subject. Diego Antunes asked about in the 3 countries, how did they deal, if they have any measures adopted to deal with the massive unemployment during the pandemics in the 3 countries, he's asking.
Mm-hmm.
If you know. Anybody can begin.
Yeah. Well, just very quickly, in the UK, we haven't yet seen this massive unemployment yet, but we will do very shortly. We've seen a big increase in unemployment, but the really big increase is yet to come, because what the government strategy was to basically pay firms to keep workers paid who were unable to work. That was called furlough. So government paid, I think it is about 15 billion British pounds per month to firms, so that they could pay their workforce 80% of their normal incomes just not to work. But that scheme is going to end in a few weeks' time. And then I think a lot of those firms will cast off the workforce, a lot of those firms will not survive, and we will be hit with very high unemployment. So tomorrow we're going to hear the government strategy. And one thing is we know it will involve a lot of construction activities. but exactly what sort of construction is a bit of an argument right now.
Keynes again, Ian. Keynes again. Okay,
Yeah.
you want to add on Hubert and Coriat to this answer?
The situation in Germany is very similar.
Yeah, and
Coriat?
similar in France too. Yeah, a slump, a very, very sharp slump, is beginning, and the whole enterprise are under a pipe of euros to survive. And the same than in UK, this will have an end, and we don't know what will happen.
Okay.
Serious question.
Thank you. Now we move to another issue that is very important for us. What Guilherme Plonsky asks, what is the role of universities in forestalling new global risks? That's for the three of you. We are very worried about universities in this country, you see, with the old and the new Ministry of Education that you might know about. Does anybody want to come into this or no? No, Hubert, no. You, Ian, no.
Well, I mean, universities certainly have a role. There's even a center at Cambridge for the study of existential risk, which has looked at many, many big issues other than just the sorts of health risk that we've been talking about today. And there are a lot of other things that we could get very worried about. This is the case. And universities, have a responsibility to think into the long term. And I'm afraid a lot of the time we haven't been very good at it. And I think Britain, for whatever reason, is a place where that has particularly been the case. So apart from risk management research, which tends to focus on risks associated with very large networks and facilities like nuclear power stations, there's relatively little development of analysis of this sort of thing in universities. There needs to be a lot more of it. We did have a lot of people, many more people than I was aware of, who were working on things like pandemic modeling. Even groups in my own university that I didn't know were very, very active.
Pandemic what? I didn't understand. Pandemic what?
Building models. And actually some of this work is very sophisticated, but there's a huge lack of sociologists and social psychologists and anthropologists in this work. It's more or less driven by behavioral scientists who are largely economistic sorts of social scientists, who are interested in things like the ways in which different signals, like price signals or nudges, can move public choices, and tend to not like the imposition of regulations very much.
Okay. Benjamin, do you want to say something? No?
No, nothing.
No. Okay. There is one for Hubert here. Sorry? The prohibition of privatization was it what made Germany successful in dealing with the pandemic? Was not what made Germany successful in dealing with the pandemic? Jorge Camargo asks. Did you understand?
I don't understand the question.
If there was a prohibition of privatization in some sense in Germany that made it successful to deal with the pandemic, if there was.
Well, all the local public health offices are public, but there are lots of laboratories that were drawn in order to do the testing. Quite a few laboratories were private, and they were immediately pulled into this. In contrast, in England, the Public Health England tried to monopolize all testing and keeping it within its organization. And in Germany, the decision was we draw on all testing facilities we have, whether public or private. but the testing itself was done by, as I mentioned, 400 local public health offices, and these are private, and the employees are public officials.
Thank you, Hubert. Then Alain Rocha makes a comment that is, and with a question at the end. One aspect of immaterial appropriation highlighted in the pandemics has been on data, which when grouped together are protected as data based by copyright. It shows very clearly how innovation can be blocked by IPRs and how important the commons are. Data and text mining functions are key to unleash innovation with data, but it is very rare in regulations all around. How come that, and the question is, how come that has been basically forgotten in most debates? The role of copyright and IPRs. Anybody can start. Benjamin, I think it's more your topic.
Yeah, including because we had this debate in France very late, that is to say at the end of the pandemics, I hope the end, at least the final stage of the pandemic. The French government wanted to introduce a technique to trace people to prevent the diffusion of the virus. And this was very badly received by the population that wanted to protect private data, because this technique was suspected to gather private data. Finally, a solution was provided by the state to guarantee privacy. But it happens that people have not downloaded the application proposed by the public authorities. One reason is that because we were at the end of the pandemic and people thought it was not necessary. The other reason is that people were very suspicious. So the issue exists and is a real issue. And in China, in Korea, and so on, they have not the same sensibility and the same problem. But in Europe, we do have this problem, and we have to find a solution to it.
Anything else on this issue? No. Leonello wants to say about his question, because apparently I didn't consider it, but I can't find it. Leonello, you want to ask directly?
It was a long
Leonello,
time. It was a long
ask
time.
directly.
It was a long time ago. I forgot it.
No, pero eu acho que eu considerei quando coloquei. I think I considered it when it was a question more related with Benjamin. No?
I was about to leave.
No scuto.
Frankly speaking, do you hear me now?
Yes. The question was considered because you said, you asked about the privatization of common goods.
Yes, of course. I was about to link up with the Coriat because we work on the same topic. And of course, I'm in principle quite in agreement with Coriat that it is a matter of what I call civil society. And maybe this kind of expression does not belong to the French jargon, but it does belong to the Italian jargon. Anyway, I really wanted to pick up a point in Hubert, because you see, I'm the only Italian in this place. There is an English, there is a German, and there is a French. And in Italy, we do have a problem that two regions, one next to the other, being administered by the same kind of political party, one went wild, and the other one managed to go, let's forgive me, let's say German. So I thought, with very few people dying and a lot of control of the territorial structure. And I think Hubert, I was surprised that he started with Merkel. He should have started with the provision of beds available and the capacity available in the hospitals in Germany, which is comparable to Veneto. It is not comparable to Lombardia, where we still today we have 2/3 of the infected people are in Lombardia. For many reasons, of course, but one of the reasons is that, of course, we don't have the same territorial structure, distributed structure of the beds and available and capacity available. That's because in the past few years, we had a dramatic change from a publicly oriented common goods kind of thing, health system, to a privatized one in Lombardia. It wasn't in Veneto. So that, I think the basic thing, that compares England to Germany, to Italy, some parts of Italy, is exactly the territorial structure and the availability of capacity on the place, and which is lacking in England because in the past few years, they went through a Lombardia kind of a process, and is still available in Germany, as is in Veneto, which, by the way, Veneto used to be Austrian until very recently, I must say, 100, with a very strong appreciation for public services on the spot.
Okay, Leonello, and which is your, thank you very much, because now you're giving us a talk on Italy, which is very helpful, because we didn't have this in the panel. So thank you very much. But you had also a question for Hubert, and I didn't get the question. I didn't understand. Anna, did you understand the question to Hubert? Anna, help me. Did you understand the question to Hubert? Because I can't hear Leonello. I can't hear his voice.
Let's Hubert to ask this. No?
Well, it was primarily an observation. And
Yes.
I agree with Leonello. Perhaps I should have started with what we find at the bottom rather than at the top. That I think both are important. The key feature I would bring out for what both the German and the Italian cases have in common is a decentralized structure in the country. Incidentally, Brazil has the same. Brazil is a politically and administratively decentralized country, which is a fantastic advantage, because particularly when it comes to fighting such a pandemic, bringing in the local level quickly is absolutely important. In the UK, we do not have this. UK is an incredibly centralized country, and therefore the possibility of what you just mentioned, Leonello, that two provinces that are next to each other can learn from each other. We don't have this in the UK, because we don't even have the statistics to make this kind of immediate comparison. And so the political drive to copy best practice, the analytical advantage of comparing good with bad, does not exist. In Germany, you also have, some districts that are doing much better than others. And I've given averages, but the advantages of decentralization are enormous. And what makes me less optimistic about the UK case is that we don't have these local capacities. And it's particularly critical at the moment because the government is very fast in opening up the economy, but the testing capacity is only developing very slowly. So fast opening up with slow development of testing capacity is just causing for a big problem. Ian said more or less the same thing in different words earlier on.
Thank you, Hubert. We have 2 more questions, and we have to be brief now because I think we should close the questions now. What do you think, Anna? Yes. So we have one for Coriat that is from Francisco Duarte. He says, taking into consideration the high capacity of great corporations of capturing the democratic processes like elections, parliaments, and so forth, the question is, what kind of political coalitions you think we will have to build in order to transform our public services into common goods? For you, Benjamin.
This is exactly what we are working on. We have launched a national meeting with regarding public health, with people, specialists inside hospitals, professors, doctors, and personnel of lower level. This is one part. Then we have patients and associations of patients. Then we have people in charge of the administration of the health entities, hospitals, clinics, and so on. And then we have sociologists, economists, and so on, representative of the civil society. And the idea is exactly how to define the type of governance that prevent the possibility of privatization, that create the condition exactly what Hubert said, to have a sufficient number of beds not occupied, and how to find the right economic reason for that, because it's not simple to define these things. So we are working on that. I have not the answer, but I know that the answer lies on the balance between the different stakeholders concerned and the distribution of powers among them. This is exactly what Elinor Ostrom said. That is to say, find the right governance structure that prevent the interests of the stakeholders without the hand of the state.
Thank you, Benjamin. Now, help me, Francisco, you have more questions in Facebook, because if not, we round up now.
No, we don't have any questions in Facebook.
Okay. Now, so the last one is if health is treated as a common good. First, I want to apologize if I left somebody outside, but I tried to do my best in a summary. If health is treated as a common good, what other sectors and services should be treated as a common good also? And there's one related to that one. Do you think that public policies should support a shift like that? A shift means instead of innovating to productivity and cost reduction, they should primarily innovate to create good jobs. We can join them together because the rest are more like comments and a lot of thank yous and a lot of cheering, saying that your presentations were excellent. So, do you want me to summarize what I said or no? Because we're all tired now, no?
We're hungry.
I'm hungry, especially you. So I think it's just what other social sectors should be considered as a common good beyond health. That's the basic question. And the other one, I think we have to leave it. It's too much already. We've gone past half an hour.
It's almost 2 hours.
On the first
They were prepared, the panelists were prepared for an hour and a half, and I said a little bit more, but a little bit more is half an hour now.
Yeah.
So they have to go for dinner.
We are tolerant.
We don't want to exploit you people too much.
On the first
It
question,
goes against the idea of the commons.
on the first question, that is to say, what should be considered and treated as public good and so on. We have an answer that is, to my view, a solid reference given by the Italian lawyers, especially Stefano Rodota. And in his commission, the proposition is that the society should consider to define and define as a public good everything that has to do with the human development. And he has in mind things like health, education, culture, and things like that. But it is absolutely clear that the society has to deliberate and decide what kind of things, so to speak, even immaterial one, a society wants to protect as a public good. And the answers may be different from one civilization to another and so on. But we can say, this is my answer to the question, we can say that each time something concerns very great numbers, something like the whole population, and with externality, positive or negative, strong, just like climate change, just like health and so on, then it has to be treated as a common good. Very large numbers and positive or negative, huge externalities. Then we have a candidate for a public good, and then society has to decide.
Okay, thank you. Hubert wants to add something.
Yes, I agree with this, but in practice, it's very difficult to draw the line. At the beginning of the pandemic, at least here in England, the key, or one of the key concerns of most people was whether there would be enough food. Because London, as a big city, is 10 days away from starvation if the supply line does not work in a just-in-time system. So as it happens, the completely privately owned food system actually through the supermarkets worked very well. But is this a public good? I personally don't think so. Only in terms of this very exceptional situation, this question arose. But this was uppermost in people's mind. That's why they went to the supermarkets, bought all the pasta they could find. This was a huge concern. Will we have enough food? So, what is a public good depends very much on the ups and downs in what is happening. And that for me is one of the key lessons of the recent times. Most of us that are now connected we are in our 60s and 70s. Apologies if to the younger ones. We grew up in a period of relatively constant development, at least in Europe, constant now. Whereas in the last 20 years we've had 5 major disruptions, which we would have thought impossible until the year 2000. We had 9/11, we had the global financial crisis, we had right-wing populism, and now the corona crisis. So in 20 years, 5 major economic and political disruptions. And I think any discussion of all of these things needs to take into account these very uneven developments. In other words, defining these things once and for all will be impossible. At least that's my conclusion. And this is something we need to bring as university teachers to our students. These times of relatively even development are over. are over. I know they were never really prevalent in Brazil, but in Europe, most of our students, have this expectation or had this expectation. Things will continue evenly. They are not. We've had 5 huge disruptions, and we need to think about how we incorporate this in our models, in our ways of thinking. I'm sorry for going on so long.
Thank you. And you want to add anything in or
well, one little thing. Before we were talking about Corona crisis, there was a lot of talk about Industry 4.0, automation, the
robotization,
end of jobs, all of these things, even singularities, but let's forget about them. Whereas I think in the short term, jobs are very, very important. Jobs are really about more than just income. And if we can actually free income from jobs, then maybe we can think about freeing meaningful existence from jobs as well. And thinking that human development is actually much more about meaningful lives in which we make contributions and have relationships. And this is all sounding very wishy-washy, but in terms of, you're thinking in terms of a couple of decades from now, as opposed to 3 or 4 years from now, these are going to be major challenges confronting people in the world.
Okay, Benjamin, if I may, can I close here? Or you want to say something else?
No, I'm okay. I think that I agree again with Hubert and with Jan. We are facing very new things, but fortunately we begin to have tools, conceptual tools for that, and the fact of rethinking public services, thinking in terms of common goods and so on, open new avenues for the future. We are in the beginning of a new way, but we are not without anything to walk around these new avenues. This is my point.
Thank you, Benjamin. So in this very hopeful note, you gave us a lot of food for thought. We have a lot to discuss in pped on these issues and towards the future. And I'm very, very glad with your presentations. Everybody's congratulating you. You can read in the chat. And if I may, I would like to close now, except whether Teresa and Anna want to say something else. If not, I'm very pleased I invited you, and I had a wonderful time with your talk. And I like you all very much.
Just to add that we had an extremely interesting, insightful, productive, interesting session, but also would like to thank the audience. It's a very qualified audience. I can see several friends that are here, like Guilherme Plonsky, Inês Patrício, and Joana Dias, who came from Portugal. Deborah Fogel was here with us and made some comments. And Renata Lahovere, Alain Rocha, João Ferraz, Marília Zaluar Guimarães, also from our program of chairs, and Jorge Camargo, Mário Ripper. It's a very, very qualified audience. And then I also want to thank all of them for being just until the end of this session. So thank you very, very much. It was really amazing. It's an honor for us to have 3 emeritus professors here with us in this afternoon, evening. Thank you very much.